This is the Healthcare Marketplace Specialization, Healthcare Marketplace Overview. My name is Steve Parenti, and this is Module 4.2.2, Obtaining FDA Approval for Pharmaceuticals. So we're going to talk about this in two parts for FDA approval. The first is the pharmaceutical area, and then we're going to get into how medical devices are operated. So for pharmaceuticals, there's four phases that need to be considered. The standard for drugs is that they have to be safe and effective. The first stage one goes through is what's known as the preclinical phase. It takes usually about 3 years. This is laboratory and animal testing. The idea is to see what's going on in terms of safety and just what's the biological process that's involved. Doesn't have to be 3 years, but usually that's the average time. Now at this point, lots of acronyms here, an IND or investigational new drug application will go on and sent into the FDA. That IND will show the results of the previous experiments. It's going to spell out what the chemical structure of that compound will be, how it is thought to work in the body based upon the animal testing results here, and any toxic effects found in the animal studies and how the compound needs to be manufactured, likely for approval. Then we get into what's known as phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, then eventually phase 4. Phase 1 is a 1-year process. Once the animal studies are done, usually they look for 20 to 80 healthy volunteers. The thought is that the test will study the drug safety profile, will look for safety dose range. These really are volunteers, by the way, so they know what they're getting into. These studies will determine how the drug's absorbed, distributed, metabolized, excreted, and the duration of its activity. Once that is through and nothing goes really wrong with that, the thought is then to go to phase 2, which will be about 2 years. Now again, we're looking for a larger set of volunteers, people that have this disease, to assess the drug's effectiveness. They're controlled studies in the sense that having a little more background information on who these folks are so we can determine for what age groups, for what disease categories the drugs might work more effectively. And then we get to really the most expensive of all of the parts of FDA approval, phase 3 clinical trials. They will usually involve 1,000 to 3,000 patients. It really depends how common the disease is. They're going to be usually in clinics and hospital settings. Physicians will be involved to monitor these patients very closely. Really, all their healthcare costs are paid for by the company that's trying to produce the product at this point in time. That's why they're very expensive to do. And 3 years is not necessarily the max. They can go much longer than that, depending upon what folks find in those results. The average cost, by the way, per person can run as high as $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, depending upon data that's required. Finally, once those 3 spots are done, the company can go for FDA approval for a new drug. They usually file a new drug application. They have to complete all 3 phases of the clinical trials. The company then analyzes all the data and files with the NDA what's going on. These NDA have to have all the scientific information from the trials. It can run 100,000 pages, literally boxes of pages will be shipped to the FDA. They still want paper, it's not just all electronic. And then by law, the FDA is allowed 6 months to review that. Once they do review it, they can give their approval back over the course of the next few months. A lot of times it averages about 30 months. The hope is to get that down for more life-saving conditions, but it is a very large burden to go through all this evidence to make a final decision. Once there is FDA approval, the new medicine becomes available for physicians to prescribe. The company must still continue to submit periodic reports to the FDA and also provide any evidence of adverse reactions and appropriate quality controls. This has happened recently where sometimes some of that information will shut down certain drugs. And then the FDA will require additional studies, otherwise known as phase 4, to evaluate long-term effects. That's where they actually get insurance data to see who's been taking the drugs and look for, in the insurance data themselves, evidence of different medical conditions that were unexpected and unseen in the clinical trials. The reason why that works well is that a clinical trial can only be 3,000 people, but a health insurance database might show information on 1 million people or more. This concludes our module on pharmaceuticals going through the FDA process.